Welcome to Sexually Charged Radio. I'm Ruthie, and I'm here with my co-host,
Thomas,
and our other co-host,
Sophie.
And we are about to get all sex nerd on you and talk about research for half an hour. You are listening to us on 93.3 FM, CFRU.ca, if you're listening online. And let's start with an icebreaker. So here's a nerdy one for you. What is a research finding that you heard about that changed something about how you live your life? And I'm going to give you an example first so that you don't try to get overly serious about this and think too hard. I read a summary of a study, which is an important clarification that we will talk about in a little while, that talked about the fecal bacteria in conference room chairs with upholstery from people farting in them all day while they go to conferences. And the fecal bacteria count was way higher than I was comfortable with. And now this causes me concern every time I go to a conference or things like that. And it also has meant that I tend to choose clothing of thicker fabrics before going to these events to wear in my pants. So that is one way in which research has changed my life. Do either of you have a story about this?
I mean, definitely not in comparison to that. That one really I'm nervous just sitting right now.
Well, these actually get cleaned regularly, and they were all out in the hallway within the last few weeks to get cleaned. So I think maybe there's only 2 weeks of farting in these, and people do not sit in them for the duration of time, and they also sit in them in close proximity to me, so it's probably a little less frequent than it would be if. No, I guess they're really close to each other in an average conference. Yeah, you're screwed. Sorry.
Okay. So a study that has sort of changed how I see things or think about things, or just a really random piece of research. That's a tough question. Wish you'd given us a little bit of prep on it. I'm going to just pull from my own area because I can't think of anything else. And it's research on the disclosure dilemma. And so the disclosure dilemma is, at least in my field of study, was coined by Bell Rose Reagans. And it's the idea that individuals with invisible identities or identities that are less visible have to make a choice. Do they disclose their identity and come out and risk being discriminated against, or do they conceal it, but therefore, have the emotional and cognitive burden of trying to hide their identity?
Right.
And the reason I really like this research is that over the past 3 or 4 weeks of my life, about 6 people have come up to me talking about things in their life about oh, I need to do this, but I don't know if I do this because I could get in trouble, or I could, be discriminated against. Without knowing what this phenomenon is, they've come up to me and talked about it, and I'm seeing it in my life so frequently now. And so that's just one of those findings that has really been relevant to me recently, because I've been able to use that to help people understand why they're feeling so much tension about their situations.
It sounds like it's related to concepts around conditional outness and trying to decide how out to be, when, and where.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which we know has a lot of burden and also ties into some applications of minority stress theory, which is that it's just really stressful having a minority status, and there's certain stresses that are definitely tied to having a visible minority status, and other often quite different ones that are tied to having a not visible minority status and the different experiences. And of course, some people have both. That was a great nerdy answer, Thomas. I feel really embarrassed about my chair example. Sophie, do you have one?
I think for me, reading about personality and reading about sort of the controversy between whether someone's personality can fundamentally change or not, and reading some studies on whether personality can actually change. And I believe that it can, and some studies actually back that up. So that's been really interesting for me.
This makes me think of Big Five personality
traits.
traits. Is that still popular?
Traits. It's still super popular.
Yeah. One of my instructors and mentors when I was a doc student was one of the many people who did international research around trying to develop the Big Five personality traits thing. So let's see if we can remember what they are. Neurotic, I know, is one of them.
Yeah,
well, emotional stability is what we call it now.
Oh, emotional stability. See, Chuck always said, all right, neuroticism.
Because neuroticism is sort of the negative
side
it is.
Of it. So emotional stability. All right, thank you, Thomas. What else do we have?
I want to say conscientiousness or something.
Okay.
Oh, man. This is bad.
Somebody could Google
Well, I'm
it.
lecturing on it tomorrow. So
Oh, yeah, you got that.
Okay, you got it?
So, well, you can always remember it by OCEAN.
Okay.
OCEAN is the acronym. So, openness to experience,
Okay.
Check.
conscientiousness,
Okay,
Sort
good.
of,
I had
yeah.
one with conscientiousness.
extroversion,
Yes, got that.
agreeableness,
Sometimes.
and then we still, in this one, call it neuroticism, but now it's been flipped to emotional stability. So,
Medium. Okay. All right. All right, good. I just to self-assess myself. I don't know what any of that means, but there you go. So think about whether personality, how does that change how you interact with people and things like that?
Well, I really believe that, where I want to believe that that people can fundamentally change, and I think in interacting with people, it really reduces my stigma around people as well, because folks grow and change, and the neuroplasticity and rewiring of the brain, all of that stuff comes into play, and
Your knowledge on this would be more fresh than mine, because my learning about it is older, and also from someone whose own work in it was older. So there's that thing that can happen in academia where kind of it takes a while, and then suddenly like the next generation of people who are going through the system get like the freshest knowledge. Everyone else is like, oh, I'm old. But I tended to think about things as perhaps a predisposition, but not a destiny. I don't know if that is still how that's being talked about or not with these.
Yeah, so there are 3 different approaches to personality, and this could be our whole radio talk.
Yeah, this is great.
So we have the dispositional approach to personality. So this is who you are, and your traits exist sort of irrespective of other things. So what your personality is, and it stays that way for life.
So it's a different use of the word predisposition. Okay.
And then there's the situational approach, which is your personality changes based off of what your situation is in. So
it's very environmental, systemic.
Yeah, the context really influences how our personality emerges and shines and develops. And then we have
that matches with a lot of therapy theory. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then we get into the interactionist approach, which is much more common now, which says that it's a bit of our disposition, but it's also a bit of the situation and how those things interact. So we have sort of a base level personality, but there's fluctuation based off of the situation. And that comes back to trait activation theory. So, certain traits and dispositions and characteristics are activated and emerge based off of different types of events that happen in our lives.
Well, this makes me want to talk about how we think about dating with all of this, but that's a totally different topic, so maybe we'll do that for a different episode.
Or maybe we just go into it, because we're already talking about it.
How do you feel about that? And then we can talk about the rest of the stat on a different episode. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
So, to what degree then are we responsible for how we behave with our dating partners, or to what degree do we excuse the way our dating partners interact with us or with other social circles when we have an idea that something is at least partly genetic? What do you think?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think it's always really important to factor in, trauma and context and, genetics and trauma when it comes to who a person is and how they behave, when it comes to dating and when it comes to all of their other behaviors. So, I mean, I think that that's really important. At the same time, I think that there's an element of choice in all that we do. I think that there has to be, otherwise, I mean, that's a pretty miserable existence, right? So I think it's a combination of things. I'd like to have that. I think that's part of why there has to be that disclosure, and that's part of why that period of getting to know somebody is so exciting.
What kind of disclosure do you mean?
I mean, well, it's certainly not. It's so tricky, right? Especially at the beginning of dating somebody, to know how much to disclose. But I think that I can't really decide how to judge someone's behavior. And let's face it, when I'm dating someone, I am judging someone's behavior to a certain degree without knowing a little bit about their trauma and their background and all of their situational factors. So that has to come out a little bit, at least slowly.
I'm thinking about things like mutuality, and I'm also thinking about things like trying to set things up for success in the best way we can possible. So I'm thinking that if one person says, I need a lot of consideration taken around these sorts of topics or areas or things really, really regularly and frequently in order to have the best chance of success in this relationship with you. But is that a mutual thing where they're also reaching out to shape things with you as much as possible? So it's not a big one-sided thing. And I'm also thinking of personal accountability, thinking of a lot of things at once, especially I think because I do so much work in the area of trauma, and I'm always hyper aware of making sure that people who are asking that their partner change how they behave are doing so not from a place of control or power or entitlement, but doing so from a mutually beneficial place of setting things up for as much success as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what's kind of hitting me with that, though, is, is there a norm of personality that we idealize or think is acceptable, or the way that we should be aiming for? So, in the movies, it's really common to see an extroverted male as sort of an ideal personality type, with the more introverted female protagonist, and how, the bookish female and the successful rich male who's going to the bars and flirty and all of that, how that becomes the matching or the pairing of a relationship that works well. And so I sort of worry that maybe sometimes when we're thinking about personality and dating relationships, do we try to nudge people in ways that go towards a more normative view of personality, rather than this is their personality, or these are things that are important to them, or who they are, even if it's just in this moment or in this period of time.
Sure. So if I expect this person I met to be really outgoing and initiate sparkling conversations with all of my friends when they meet them in a group atmosphere, that's pushing and presuming towards a certain level of extroversion. And if that's not how they shine best, and they meet and get along with my friends in different ways, like one-on-one or more quiet structure activities or something like that, then that may not be, then maybe I don't get the chance to see them shine very well if I'm expecting them to do this like extrovert party, meet all my people at the giant thing at the bar thing.
Yeah, their version of shining. I think that's kind of what in terms of personality, every personality has things that can be really great about it.
Totally.
But if we're trying to be that one type of personality because that's what we think our partner should be, rather than, that's really who they are or who they want to be.
Or that's what we think we should be, instead of trying to have that insight of who we are and what works well, because everything has something that works well. It's just that we kind of privilege certain works wells. Like the extrovert, well, I assume, do extroverts get paid more?
Yes.
Okay, so they'll get paid more. Why?
So extroverts typically are more verbal, and individuals who converse more typically have the ability to develop more networks and relationships, so then there are more opportunities that are open to them as well. Those are often traits that are seen as, or traits that extroverts have are typically seen as ones that correspond with leadership.
Right.
So a leader is somebody who's outgoing, who's able to gain energy from being around others, who has the ability to connect with others on very quick moments.
Right.
So things that we've sort of based business and work around really favor a lot of extroverts.
And dating too.
And dating as well, yeah.
I mean, as a pretty intense extrovert myself, I can tell you there's lots of downfalls and qualities that I don't have, but nobody ever gives me crap about that because I'm extroverted. But then when I need that stuff around me to get a task completed or to create balance in the environment or in order to experience a different side of myself, I have to go find an introvert because I can't provide it. Yeah, but they'll still get paid less or dated less for that situation. I feel like we just ran away with it. Sophie, what's on your mind with this?
I think you make an interesting point that it's not even necessarily just what we're looking for in our we're looking for in our partner, but what we think we should be looking for. I don't know what I'm saying. I think
it's like these societal ideals and what these
societal ideals that not only is society telling us that we should be finding this sparkling extrovert. And that's what we should be finding, but that we might not even ourselves be looking for that sparkling extrovert. We might be better matched with an introvert.
Yeah. I'm a bad match for a lot of people, but a lot of people feel like they should like me. This happens regularly, and then they find me exhausting or intimidating. That's not necessarily just the extroversion. That could be lots of different things, but and I immediately think to myself, like, oh, I bet you would be so much happier with the person who didn't run right up and introduce themselves immediately, because actually after about 5 minutes, that's not pleasant for you anymore.
Yes, exactly. That example of going to the bar, not only do I not necessarily, I might want my partner to shine at the bar, mm-hmm. but I might not even want to be there at the bar to watch my partner shine at the bar, right?
Sure,
does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot of pressure for all parties.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm just sort of thinking about my own partner and sort of that whole context and how, it's an example of, he's great with smaller groups and not as great with every to bring him to all of my friends at once is a huge pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just better to give him fewer opportunities.
Absolutely.
Not fewer opportunities, but opportunities
that are better fitted.
They're better fitted to him.
Yeah, maybe few stressful opportunities and more like positive.
And speaking of positive opportunities, we just want to take this opportunity to remind you that you're listening to Sexually Charged Radio at 93.3 FM in the Guelph region or CFRU.ca. Or maybe perhaps you're listening to us on YouTube by searching Sexually Charged Radio to listen to some of our past episodes.
If you have a question or a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, or you have an opinion about how wonderful we are, you can email that to AskSC. Those are the initials for Sexually Charged. AskSC at Guelph, GUELPH.ca. And the wonderful students from Student Wellness here on campus will receive those emails and forward some of those topics and questions onto us here at the show. They also do so much with the editing and the uploading and all that great stuff. So we're quite fortunate to have that collaboration. Sophie, so I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm thinking about how I had a coworker situation in a previous job, and I'm just not going to go into the details of that, but man, could she do good work. Like, she did better work than anyone else in our little quad thing. And it just was never, ever noticed because she was not the person to bring it up at meetings. She was a quiet listener who took good notes. She asked questions absolutely appropriately when she needed clarification, but she didn't. She wasn't interested in a lot of bubbly social building type stuff, which is fine because, man, could she get stuff done really, really well. And I remember some conversations I had with her where we were talking about meetings in which I ended up getting a lot of credit for her job just because I spoke more openly. And that also makes me think about dating situations where, like, the person we try to match our friends up with or the person we're most directed to are those folks. But we also mentioned, like, other types of personality traits. So we've mostly been talking about the extroversion, and conscientiousness was one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Can anyone give us any kind of definition of conscientiousness to make sure I understand it the same way you do?
So conscientiousness is one of the most fascinating personality traits because it really is most related to everything. And conscientiousness is the idea of being detail-oriented and focused. We can think of it very similarly to the traditional ideas of perseverance and organizational skills, being able to synthesize information and see sort of a bigger picture out of the details. So conscientiousness is often correlated highly with traditional intelligence and how that's measured. That's a whole other talk. But it's mostly about that, I'm somebody who I will stick to what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to be detail-oriented in how I do it, and I'm going to be very thorough in what I'm doing. Awareness is maybe a good synonym.
I'm struggling with this one because I'm thinking about accessibility concerns, and what we might call like neuroatypic kind of statuses. So folks who are on the autistic spectrum, people who have a bit of obsessive compulsive going on, or who are very poor at monitoring time. And so it's not that they don't care, they're not thinking about it, but they don't have that internal clock.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I have like this 50-minute clock from working in mental health, right? And I'm pretty good at guessing what time it is. You know, people say what time it is. I'm like, oh, I think it's about 2:10. So I'll be like, it's 2:08. That was amazing. And I think it's just maybe part of my brain and part of living around clocks all the time for my job and stuff. But I'm concerned that, oh boy, I feel like if somebody has a lot of difficulty with their internal clock or something like that, it could easily be seen as somebody who doesn't care, who can't be detail-oriented, things like that. But really, they might be quite detail-oriented in other ways, but that thing doesn't work out. So how do we handle that? Are they just not conscientious? Are they conscientious in some ways? Is conscientiousness really just code for some sort of neurotypic standing? What do you think?
That's a really awesome question.
Thanks. I felt like it was very confusing, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind on this one is, and thinking again about the relationship aspect and conscientiousness within a relationship, is that it can really emerge and look very different depending on the individual. So I think we have traditional assumptions of conscientiousness. It's the person who remembers when the birthdays are, takes out the garbage, you know, before the garbage truck is down the street,
yeah.
And those sorts of pieces. But conscientiousness can also be almost an awareness of the other individual and their needs.
Okay.
So maybe it's not just about like the details of the relationship or about how to be in a good relationship. It could be conscientiousness about the other person.
Yeah.
So I'm going to like go through this list of, you know, okay, did I say hello to this person in the morning? Did I check in to see how they're doing after their day?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there is like typicality within that, but it's not, you know, for me, that's my processing. That's a list. But for others, their processing of conscientiousness could be, I don't need to ask it in a linear fashion. I don't need to ask it every day, but I have my own version of how I'm aware and sort of detail-oriented to this relationship.
So what happens if somebody's not conscientious? What does that mean about them? Like, what if they're not shining in any of those various ways you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Because it's not really a useful category if we can find a way for everybody to be there. Like that's not how research works. There are certainly we've operationalized it, we've defined it, and you are in it or you're not in it, or you're it like, 3/4 of the way or some sort of definable thing.
And there certainly are people who are low in conscientiousness.
Yeah. Do we just throw them in the garbage and hope they date each other? What do we do with that?
Well, but I think there are certain people who, are really attracted to people low in conscientiousness. It's that idea that, conscientious individuals are often thought to be planners, that they've thought ahead of what, their life is going to be like. They're kind of working towards that. And some people don't like that. And
so it sounds like people, maybe they're one way to express a lot of creativity and to kind of live in the moment. And those other characteristics might also correlate with being low conscientiousness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough balance because part of that is also the openness to experience personality trait and how that plays both in concordance with conscientiousness, but also they're separate. But I think, there's this idea that there are different personalities and people are attracted to different things. A lot of people aren't attracted to people who are really high in conscientiousness because that can be intimidating to have somebody who's just like, yes, this is how we're going to do things. We're going to be leaving the house at this time, and we're never going to be late. We're never going to, be the ones who cancel plans. For some of us, we like people who aren't that way.
How do narcissists score on conscientiousness?
Because, you can be quite manipulative as a narcissist and be able to do all those things.
I don't know the data on that too well. And from what I recall, and this is pulling from years ago, so I'm not fully up to date on the research, is that there are similarities there, but it's not a strong correlation. Because a narcissist that's sort of a whole, that gets more into the emotional stability and neuroticism
Yeah.
personality trait than it does into the conscientiousness. But it could absolutely get really bad.
So I would assume with these 5 that it would be very rare to find somebody who's in, what we've decided is the most socially desirable category for all 5 of them, right? So we all have like ways to grow and balance and things like that. And as we get to know ourselves, we might be looking for something that isn't kind of this socially deemed best sort of thing, like somebody who is cool with canceling plans when you don't feel up to it, because you also like to cancel plans, or because you worry that people won't tell you if they don't really want to be there, or something like that. This is all interesting. I'm not sure what to do with this as I think about it, but it is itchy for me to think about these things being somewhat predetermined in a genetic way, right? Like that's a little weird. What do you think?
Yeah, it is itchy. I think that, and I think that they can change, or at least somewhat, and so that's hopeful for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You were talking about the importance of pre-disclosure with things too, and like talking about how you bring up stuff to your dating partners and when and along the way, and it sounds like that requires a lot of self-awareness of both who you are, but also what works best for you, as well as some level of flexibility. So I can see it being really valuable for that sort of self-insight of who you are and what you're looking for to make it as successful as possible. Because if we're just shooting for what we've been told we should be getting, and we're just trying to be what we're told we should be, you're going to end up paying me a lot of money as your therapist. So...
yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful talk. We're just wrapping low on time here.
Mm-hmm.
This all came from Sophie talking about personalities can change over time. And I think it's important that we do remember that for most individuals in psychology, we do believe in shifting personalities. And so maybe next time you listen to this episode, you'll have a different personality from when the first time you listened to it. And
maybe I'll be an introvert.
Maybe.
All right. All right. Thank you all. You've been listening to Sexually Charged Radio. If you are in the Guelph area in Ontario, it's 93.3 FM. You may be streaming at cfru.ca or listening to us on YouTube under Sexually Charged, and we look forward to you joining us in the future.